Good morning. Welcome everyone to our Sunday morning Bible study. If you've not picked up material, it's available on a little table and just behind the back row in the center when you walk in. It was a little tardy arriving. It was a little tardy getting from the printers, and that's some of our not asking for it, taking longer to decide on the material for this quarter than anticipated, or at least thinking the printer would be a little more responsive than we anticipated. So depending on how we want to shift the blame there, but we will be studying about authority this particular quarter, and there's a particular type of authority we've got in mind, of course. But this material was chosen for a number of reasons. One is that it was available to us. I was able to see the questions in a timely fashion, and I thought it was novel in that the questions were at the basically included in the sidebar. As you go through, as you're doing the lesson, you're presented with the question that's going to, instead of having to flip back, you're right on the page where you need to, where it was most recently shown, rather than having them all the material in the section of blanks that you fill in. So I thought that was kind of novel, and that was worth giving a try. But I was also taken by the title that really drew my attention. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in a moment after we start with a word of prayer. And I'm going to ask Chuck, if you would, to word that prayer for us in your outdoor voice, please. No, from there, just... Thank you. This topic is interesting from a number of different aspects, not the least of which is that even if you don't think about authority very much, or you don't think much of authority, it touches your lives in almost every way. Everyone here has an attitude about authority, and it may depend upon where you were raised, how you were raised, whether or not you were in a military, the type job that you have, your life experiences. They've colored your opinion, your considerations of authority, and you may not realize that, but that's part of the natural growing up and being a grown-up process. That's the way that we develop our thinking, is mostly by our experiences, some about what we can learn, but it's this is something. It's even if you don't give any thought to the people that can tell you what to do. They still have that right. And you may think that, we in this country, for instance, think that, I woke up in a free country, I get to do what I want all the time. And it doesn't really work that way. And in fact, the author reminds us here in the opening paragraphs that we, going about our everyday lives, we depend upon the authorities who ensure that the restaurants we eat in are to a certain standard of cleanliness, that the people are preparing and delivering food to us are doing that in a particular way. That when we go to the pharmacy and we buy a product to cure or to help us cope with a particular type of an ailment, that's been manufactured in a way that there's nothing in there it's not supposed to be. And all that is, we do all that because of authority. Sometimes that's the only thing that is keeping our society in check, is the fact that someone will punish them if they don't. But nonetheless, that's a demonstration of authority that we deal with all the time, whether or not we think about it or not. When you were driving here, you probably consciously or unconsciously, at some point when you left the house and you pulled in the parking lot, thought about how fast you were going, the speed limits. And it's just, you may say, well, it's just common courtesy. I just care about, getting where I'm going and not preventing somebody else from getting where they're going. Well, maybe you thought that, but a lot of people just get behind and they're oblivious to everything but what's 20 feet in front of the car at all times. They don't think of, literally don't think of anything else. And so the authority exists whether or not the people being governed by it are even mindful of it. And so it's an important topic, and it's worthy of our consideration, not just from philosophy, but from the title, the God-shaped authority. Christopher. And that's exactly how people get their authority is part of what we're going to spend the next 13 weeks talking about. Is it, and from this particular, I got some ideas. I got a couple of ideas that came to mind from the particular title of this book. It kind of hooked me early on. But what does this clever little title here, God-shaped respect for authority, what does that suggest to you? Christopher. Okay, the authority comes from God. That's one aspect of it. Cynthia? Okay, we get to at least form our own opinion about that authority, which may or may not be valid, as it turns out. Again, the people under the authorities, whether or not they recognize the authority is almost academic. Things may be smoother along if we recognize the source of authority and we concede that, yes, those people can tell me what to do, but it's not a requisite. They're still in authority whether or not we concede it or not. Yes? Okay, there are, as it turns out, there are different levels or stages of authority. Again, the authority to manufacture aspirin, that's granted by a governing body, may differ in one place than another, as far as what else can be in your aspirin. Yeah, I can say it's got to contain so much of the pill has to be aspirin, but the rest of it could be clay or dust or something entirely undesirable too. But they still qualify to be called as aspirin because it contains 15% of the chemicals that. Anyway, I digress. You get the idea. There's some expectations about how that's going to be given, and there are different levels. And and adults living in the 21st century where authority will touch their lives in different kinds of ways. And what else from this phrase, God-shaped respect for authority, Marcia? Okay, there's lots of things about the authority, and the scriptures say a lot about authority, and including about who enjoys the authority here on earth and who enjoys the authority cosmically. And even over time, there's going to come a time, the scriptures tell us, and part of the reason this merits our attention is because the scriptures do have quite a bit to say about authority and imply and suggest about authority to give us a glimpse behind the scenes. And not just be left to come up with an attitude about authority on our own. And so the importance of having a God-shaped view of authority gets to be pretty important. Not only as how our opinion or how our relationship to God goes, but how we conduct our lives. If we have an expectation about authority that we are all puppets and we're on a rail and we can't make any decisions for ourselves and we just life is just going to be what life's going to be, and we can't have any impact on it by the decisions. Anything we say or do or think doesn't really matter. Then that's going to bring us at a very different place, and we've recognized that we are free moral agents and accountable for our actions. Right? That's two opposite ends of the scale. And yet, there are people who go to the scriptures and claim that both of those are true. And we'll loop back to that several times, I'm sure, in the course of our lesson. Not this lesson, but in the course of our study. Anything else that's suggested by this phrase, God-shaped? Jerry?
All the questions that God posed to Job, I will ask you things that you relate to.
Which? That was interesting because when Job was challenged in that fashion, said, "All right, I'm here. I'll ask the questions and you answer." Job deferred. He said, "I don't have anything to say before my God." And that's I think as God's people who want to be God's people should let God shape their view of authority. Should let God shape their view of a lot of things. That's going to be a qualifier ultimately to be God's people. But the scriptures also, the scriptures make a lot of claims that deserve a lot of scrutiny. One of which is that there'll come a time, a moment in history, according to Philippians, the 2nd chapter, when every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess that Jesus is Lord, regardless of what you believed before, regardless of whatever conclusion that you came to about who can tell you what to do. There'll come a point in time when everyone who has ever lived will concede the point that Jesus is in fact Lord. That's what the scriptures say anyway, and I believe it. And so whatever it is you think about authority, we will all of mankind will agree on this point at some point in the future, that in fact Jesus is Lord, and all that entails. And no matter how much how well-formed your argument to the contrary, or why your reasons for believing differently, or your reasons for believing that, will kind of be moot at that point, because that will be an established, undeniable fact. And understanding that the scriptures make that claim ought to move the needle for us about authority. Well, who can, those are just Bronze Age folk tales. I can't believe that you're putting ingredients in that. But because the scripture, I'm not saying that you just because the scriptures say it, we ought to believe it, until we have satisfied ourselves that the scriptures are, in fact, authoritative. And many of the reasons that they'll be authoritative will be because of the conclusions that we'll draw, and then what we begin to dip our toe in here. I was drawn to this also by, literally a God-shaped respect for authority, is that we have no better example of that than Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ in Hebrews, the 1st chapter, says that he is the expressed image of God. Were God to manifest himself on earth as a physical entity, that what they outlined, what it would look like is Jesus, is what Hebrews 1 and verse 3 suggests to us. And so Jesus Christ, as an example, as the firstborn of the kingdom, of our brother, is the God-shaped respect for authority, or is an example of God's respect for authority. Is if we have to wonder, well, what would God want me to do here? We ought to secondarily ask, well, do we have any record? What did Jesus do? Because Jesus was a living instance, a living proof, the living example, living demonstration of God's view of authority. Hebrews, the 5th chapter, tells us that he humbled himself. He learned obedience to become the author of our salvation. That was all part of the process. That's part of what Jesus Christ came to earth to do, is to demonstrate God's view of authority. Now, the authorities that Jesus had, you might say, well, he lived in very different times than we did. They hadn't even discovered democracy yet. Those were primitive people. The world view of authority in the Rome in the 1st century was, manifestly inferior to ours. Ours is way different. Well, there's some people that think that it is. As a matter of fact, many of the people, especially of the free thinkers, have a fantastically low opinion of authority, because that tends to harsh their view of them, what they think. That begins to suggest that, wait a minute, what I think is not the bottom line on this. That's not the last word in this, because if somebody else can tell me what to do or to think, then I'm not in charge. And again, many of our elite, many of the free thinkers have a fantastically low opinion of authority of all kind, and some of how in democracy we elect our leaders. I mean, we have our least qualified people that are able to have exactly a one-to-one parity voice with the most qualified people. And in fact, many of these folks believe that there's kind of an autocracy, that only the worthy ought to be the leaders, and not surprisingly, including themselves among the worthy. So there's a lot of conflicting ideas about authority. Christopher?
You look back at history, man was giving, before the printing press, man was still reading, was giving everything of it, and then the printing press came out. It revolutionized the authority of what's in the Bible. You would think, in today's world, with the internet and everything else, if you have all the information, that people would be more into authority than looking into the Bible. But now there's so much misinformation out there, they want to.
That's absolutely true. When things like the printing press, things like the internet, things that allow the spread of information also allow the spread of incomplete or disinformation in equal quantities. I've jokingly said several times that the first qualification of putting something on the internet is to have time on your hands. You don't necessarily have to have anything valid to say or anything new to offer. But if you got time on your hands, you're automatically qualified to consider putting something out on the internet. I mean, the bar is exceptionally low, which means that the people who do discover truths can very easily publish them, right alongside the rest of the 99% of useless dross that whatever occurred to somebody to publish. The challenge really is for us to rightly divide the word, as it were, not necessarily just the scriptures, which the scriptures do encourage us to do, by the way, is to rightly divide the word. And the claims that the scriptures make for us cannot be disregarded, can't be swept aside. It's not just a kind of a good book, like those people who make the claim about Jesus Christ. But yeah, he was a great teacher. Well, he may have been a skilled teacher, but he was not great because he was a good man, unless what he said about himself was true. That you can't. I mean, the baby in the bathwater is that if Jesus was so great, then we ought to be paying close attention to what he said. And when he claimed to be the Son of God, when he claimed to be Emmanuel, God with man, when he claimed to be our Savior, we can't just brush that aside and say, yeah, he's just having an off day then. He wasn't connected to the truth then. But he was a good guy the rest of the time. He was a great moral teacher. He's a good man. He's either fantastically deluded, a great deceiver, or in fact he was what he said he was. And this outline, this God-shaped, a demonstration of God's view of authority in his life, which is to me what that God-shaped view of authority or God-shaped respect for authority suggested. Now, it may not have been what the author had in mind, but it's hooked. It stayed in my mind. It stayed hooked in there pretty good. And so at several points, we need to ask ourselves, what would Jesus do? In Jesus' teachings and how Jesus lived his life, is it in fact demonstrating this? Is it in fact a demonstration of the things that we're considering? Fred?
Early on, I assumed that anyone who read the Bible knew what truth was, knew what God desired. They would surely do it. But there's another problem. We have free will. Our free will will overrule our life.
It can. And we are capable, and this is a very powerful tool because of the gifts that we've been given in terms of our intellect. We are capable of fierce rationalization. And even in the wrong, if we're left by ourselves quietly enough, we can find a way of viewing that from a particular aspect or particular angle that we're not wrong at all. In fact, we're well within our rights to have done what we did, and those claws that can't see that they're just unfortunate. And we can rationalize ourselves into that position. We consider that first and great sin. Well, what was the first and great sin? Say eating of the fruit of the garden, the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Well, that was the action, but the sin actually occurred before the action, didn't it? What was the first sin? It wasn't framed that way. Wasn't say, come on over here. Let me help you reject God's authority. That's not the way it was pitched, was it? What was the lure? What was the attraction of this of rejecting God's authority, Christopher? You can have all the knowledge. And anybody else recall? You will be as God. Now, there's a You might say this is your chance for an upgrade to first class. You know, we've got space, and because of your medallion status, we want you to sit in first class. That's not really that's one way of understanding it. This getting this big upgrade, but I think it was much subtler than that. What goes along with being God? What's the advantage? If you're mankind, you have access to the tree of life. You live in, you've got responsibilities in the garden. Why would you want to be God? God gets to make rules. Matter of fact, there are roots of the words in the names that God chooses for himself that suggest the lawmaker, the one who is able to make law, and suggested, parenthetically, and not be accountable for the rules, not have to follow the laws himself. God is in that position. And the lure of, and you will be like God, is, I think, the real, not just as this fruit is really good looking, and they conceded it was pleasant to the eye. And not just the allure that it was forbidden. You're not allowed to do that. Matter of fact, if you remember the dialogue, Ben, well, you can eat anything you want, can't you? That was the approach the serpent made. And say, well, yes, we can, except for this one. And he said, well, what's so special about that? And after all, it looks like it's good to eat, doesn't it? And the dialogue proceeded from there, but it ultimately landed at the place that Christopher just reminded us of. Excuse me. Is that once you eat of it, you will be as God. And that's again not saying that you will be God. Satan didn't overpromise there. He said you will be like God. You will be as God, and that you will be a rule maker. You can set the rules for yourself. And it's not necessarily that, well, after all, who else was there to rule? Arguably, Eve was probably already had pretty good portion of Adam's attention, right? Because he was the only other person on earth, only other full-time person on earth. God's Spirit walked with them in the evening, but in terms of who is she going to rule over? If it's just I want power to be able to make rules. Most important power, I think, suggested in the lure of that, is the ability to make rules for yourself. And maybe to be on an equal footing with God so that you could counter. He says, I want you to do this. I don't want you to do that. You basically, well, I don't think that's a good idea. I'm going to do this. And you would be on an equal decision-making, equal footing, as it were, for determining what I get to do. And that, maybe I've thought about this too much, but that's a powerful lure. That's a pretty enticing offer, isn't it? Because we as human beings love being the thing we love the most. I think we love hearing this phrase I'm about to share with you. Even above, I love you or I need you. This phrase, if somebody comes along and says, well, just do what you want. Does it get any better than that? Permission to do what you want. That seems unfettered. I mean, it suggests and not face consequences for it. Just go ahead and do what you want. It will be all right. Is there anything better? From us as a human animal, just scratching our itch as a life under the sun. Is there anything better than a condition that says, just do what you want? Maybe and I'll pay and we'll pay for it. Somebody else will pay for it. There are other sweeteners we could put on there, but the lure of being told you can decide to do what you want is very powerful, and that's at the root of this. And you're saying, well, we're not even off the first or second paragraph here in the lesson, but all this is entailed in our attitude about authority. To me, that's what we're bringing to bear. That's what we're dragging with us into this particular study, and that we're going to have to wrestle with over the next few weeks is how our attitude for authority reckons and aligns with what the Scriptures reveal about it, and in fact, why we should even care about what the Scriptures reveal about it. Christopher?
There is a problem with society with all of us. There is no authority. They want to be their own God. They want to, and that's, to me, is the most sad thing about that.
And that's kind of why I thought it was important to state some of the things that I did earlier. That there'll come a time in which Jesus will be acknowledged as Lord, and it won't be disputed. Whether or not they acknowledge it while they were living or whatever other types of conditions, we will get to a point in history in which that will be the case. And in fact, that everybody wants to be their own authority and nobody wants to cede authority to anyone else doesn't change the fact that there is, in fact, a sovereign authority as stated by the Scriptures. Do you like this definition? The power or right to determine, control, command, judge, or prohibit the action of others. Dominion, jurisdiction. Do you like that definition? Is anything left out? That's a lot of words. That's a dictionary-style definition. Is there anything about authority that doesn't cover? That's sweeping. We may enhance that as we go along, but that's a pretty sweeping definition. And an understanding of authority, understanding of the way authority is manifested in various ways, plays a part several times. And there's one particular passage that I want to turn our attention to in the New Testament. This is in Luke chapter 7, or I'm sorry, I'll make absolutely sure. It's Matthew chapter 8. This also, this is a incident is also reported in Luke chapter 7 from a little different point of view. Beginning in chapter 8 and verse 5 of Matthew. That's Jesus, when he had entered Capernaum, a centurion came forward to him, appealing to him. Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, suffering terribly. And he said to him, I will come and heal him. But the centurion replied, Lord, I'm not worthy to have you to come under my roof. But only say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I too am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. And I say to one, go, and he goes. And I say to another, come, and he comes. And to my servant, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard this, he marveled. And he said to those that followed him, truly, I tell you, with no one in Israel have I found such faith. I tell you that many will come from the east and west and recline at table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven, while the sons of the kingdom will be thrown into the outer darkness, and in that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, so on and so forth. But ending with verse 10, truly I tell you, with no one in Israel have I found such a faith. Now, centurion was a Roman soldier. Again, as a qualified, not everybody got to be a centurion. It wasn't like you served in the army a certain amount of time and you graduated to be centurion. Centurions are one of those unique characters, unique class of people in the New Testament that are uniformly treated with respect and speak. The New Testament speaks highly of centurions. The Romans chose them carefully and gave them responsibility for 100 men, thus the name. And they demonstrated, at least as the examples we see in the New Testament, to demonstrate themselves to be a people of high character and a unique understanding of this authority. And so the centurion, because of his background, because of his job, his vocation, he's uniquely understanding authority. He has a unique aspect and understanding of Jesus' position and what Jesus' capabilities are. Jesus didn't have to get things done. Jesus doesn't have to do them in person. That's one of the benefits of authority, is you can send someone else. You can tell them go, you can tell them come or do this, and it gets done. And centurion understood that in his vocation, and he understood the authority that Jesus represented, that Jesus didn't have to come to his house to heal his servant. He didn't have to be there and do it. He didn't have to touch him in person. He didn't have to be there in person. He could do it long distance. That all he had to do was agree to it. What's the word that Jesus uses to describe that here for this man? Faith. What is faith? What's the Hebrews 11, chapter 11, verse 1 definition of faith? Clinical definition. Substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. This is the result of a mental process. We think about faith as, can't be explained, or, it's better felt than told. And there's aspects of that are true, but in this particular case, the centurion didn't arrive at this. He didn't arrive at this faith that Jesus identified here because of his feelings or something, that couldn't be explained. He had a solid definition. proof positive, a demonstration of what authority really meant. And he just overlapped that with his understanding of Jesus and said that if I, as a human being, I can make something happen without having to do it myself, well, certainly a man of God like this would have the same kind of authority. And that Jesus recognized. He didn't say, this man's understanding is the best that I've found in Israel. This man really gets authority. Jesus didn't call that out, which is in fact what the centurion said to him. But instead he calls it out, he calls it his face. As people of God, this commands our attention, isn't it? This is the metric. This is the thing that we're wanting to boost in our lives, to demonstrate, to fully enjoy our status as a people of God. Because that relationship is, I will be their God and they will be my people. That's the relationship that we're talking about here, isn't it? We associate that with the law. Yeah, that's how God treated the Israelites. But he's a lot more liberal now. He's got a better model in mind now. And it's this kind of gentle mental assent toward about God. But we can go about and just live our lives without all the encumbrances and the rules under the law because God's love. Well, all of those things are kind of true in a fashion, but it's a mashup of incomplete scriptural truths that have led us to believe something that's completely false. That's the reason why I think that we need to have a good understanding of how to establish, how to interpret, how to understand, how to think about authority. And I'll tell you this. I think it's going to be challenging to us. We're going to have to maybe unpack some things and repack them mentally. And much about maybe what you think about authority may, in fact, we might have to unlearn. We might have to step back, and that's part of the learning process. Is that that great prophet Yogi Berra said it's not always what you don't know that gets you into trouble, but what you know that ain't so. And so to remediate that, we have to unlearn some things to be able to actually restock with facts, restock with the truth, to have a genuine and true understanding of what the scriptures say about authority, which is ultimately our measure here. It's not what we decide here in this collective group that we're the world's caucus, and they've charged us with examining this important topic and coming to a conclusion, and it will be held up as a referendum, and people will vote on it, and if the majority like it, then that's going to be the world's view on authority. That's not why we're here. We're not here explicitly to change other people's thinking about authority. You might have thought, it's about time we got around studying. We haven't studied this in a while. This will help some of those folks that I attend with really get their thinking in line. And it's my hope that in fact is true. But that's not the people that it's aimed at. It's aimed at me. Is my view of authority in fact God-shaped? Has God influenced my conclusions? Has God influenced my understanding of authority? Our understanding of authority. This is what we'll be working to in the coming weeks. And having, I think, setting some of the ground rules and understanding how we're going to use this material to that end, I think has been pretty useful. That's probably the world's longest introduction. And I've done most of the talking, and with some well-placed commentary by some of you folks. But having set our direction, having set our face toward Jerusalem, as it were, what else do we need to know before we get underway? Fred. So you agree with me? See, this is great. We're starting off on a terrific page. Fred and I are on the same page. No, I'm glad that appeals to you. That's the reason I felt like it was important to look at this example, because our faith is what's in the balance. That's just some esoteric thing, whether or not you can answer the questions on authority and jeopardy. Our faith is dependent upon this. Please proceed. Truth.
So we assent to something, we agree to something that's being true, now we have to act on it.
Okay.
So two aspects of faith. The second thing is the faith is Through faith, not by works.
Exactly. And even to come to the knowledge and to respect of the authority that who in the universe is able to remove the consequences of the eternal consequences of sin. Who can we appeal to do that? We're lost. We're crushed. I mean, we're completely without. We are without the means to be able to provide this for ourselves. No matter how rich we are or how influence, how long we can live, we are utterly incapable of being able. Who can we appeal to this? Well, we're going to have to find an authority, right? We're going to have to appeal to an authority. And in fact, this authority exists. The scriptures portray God as having this ultimate authority because of the names that he chooses for himself, his behavior, the type of being that he is, where he dwells. God is not a man. He's not subject to the same kind of limitations we are with points in time. It's like God is present at every point in time. And we as men can't even fathom what that's like. He is all the things that we can see and experience around us came into being because of his effort. That's a tremendous amount of power. There are things that the scriptures tell us about God, and they don't tell us everything that we want to know. But so far as we know, and if we doubt this, where can we take it to court? Where can we make the appeal? Who could we appeal to? So, there's a charlatan over here that claims to have created everything. Won't somebody get him in line? Is there a higher power than God? How would we find it? How would we know? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. That in terms of what's been revealed to us, this is the best, as incomplete and as many questions we may have about it, this is the best and most complete information that we have to act on. It is, dare I say it, authoritative. Christopher?
I just think as a biological chemistry, they've done studies on the brain, when it comes to faith. And certain parts of the brain lights up and so forth, and you have that faith, and atheist doesn't have that. And we're all, biology work for and we have to have kind of scientific people to study it. It's just fascinating. I don't know what the article is, but I found it very interesting that if you have faith, your brain rewires itself to have that, and if you don't, you don't.
And the brain is capability of rationalization, is capability of returning, being able to recover from injury and memory and all that is fascinating. And it's very capable, but this is not purely a consent topic. We can decide something, and that holds no weight, as it turns out, no matter how many people believe it. It's one of the things the lesson mentioned about here. Is what the majority of people think authoritative? Well, in some measure it is, because it will govern how people act. Is that they'll act on what they believe to be truth, or what they want to believe, perhaps. But that's not a very well gelled set of ideas. That's always in motion. That's changing constantly, and it's dependent upon what you ate, the circumstance, your luck. There's all kinds of things that influence how you feel. It's not a reliable measure. And left being governed by how we feel or what we feel like is the truth, that's going to be insufficient, and it's not going to hold up very well because it's limited to us and what we know, which at any point in time is incomplete. There is no point in which we can say, well, we've discovered all the facts there is to discover about that. We're done. We don't need to be confused by any more knowledge. Human beings have never saturated their understanding of anything that way. Because just at the point where they'll tell you with scientific certainty that there are only 9 planets in the universe, they'll discover another one. And what we were just wrong? We just miscounted the person we put in charge of counting them, was missing a finger and couldn't get that far. How do we go from 9 to another one? Well, we know better now. Because what we know is a slurry of information that's being constantly dumping things that turned out to be wrong conclusions and replacing it with things that they hope are better. That's the basis of human knowledge. Human knowledge can only be so authoritative. God claims to be outside of that. His aspect is different than that. He's not bound by the available information at the time. He can see and actually experience the unfolded, the unanticipated, the unexecuted future. He can see possible futures, and not just as an instinct or a graph on from a spreadsheet. God's a different kind of being. He represents a different base of information to be able to provide us the information that he wants us to know. As a model for this, consider the law that he gave to the children of Israel. And yes, it has a lot of rules about how you think, and particularly behaviors that are a result of how you think, like thou shalt not murder. Okay, it has rules like that have to do with that are moral and have to do with thinking and attitude and behavior. But it is also the law that the children of Israel lived under that governed when they could sell land and who could own it. And you may not remember what the year of Jubilee is. Some of you do. You remember that? That matters. No matter who you bought the land from and how long that you've been on it, it goes back to the original owner at the end of 50 years. They built an economic system around that, but that was built into the law. Point being, the law has a lot of arcane information in it that governed and touched the life of the adult Jew every single day. There was no day that an adult Jew, a descendant of Abraham, a Hebrew, lived that he didn't encounter the law in some aspect. It might have been how he treated his neighbor, how he treated a stranger, what he did on what day. There were some days that he wasn't allowed to pick up sticks to be able to kindle the fire. He knew that because those were in the rules, and he should have picked up enough sticks the day before to be able to keep the fires going on the Sabbath day. All those rules that touched his life every single day. Well, as it turns out, that was an authority. That's like the authorities in our lives. Authority touches our life in every single day, no matter how free that you are to do as you please. That freedom is at best, and at any point in time, cooperative. Even in our society. And we have to have an understanding of that's being meted out to us by the authority. You are not, despite the fact that what song is on the radio and how big of a hurry that you are to get where you're going, you're not allowed to drive through neighborhoods at the fastest limit that your car will stay on the pavement. That's just not allowed. Even if you don't realize that when you hopped in the keys and you turned it on and that great song came up that elevated your spirits and impacted your judgment and told you that you could drive at freeway speeds through your neighborhood. That's almost a trivial example, but it is an example of the fact that our attitude toward authority is constantly with us and governs almost every situation it will be in. And not just which scriptures can trump other scriptures, and how we think that we can refute religious error by applying this passage to that passage. That's not all that's involved in rightly dividing the truth. And understanding the basis of why the scriptures are authoritative. That's something that we'll examine as well in the course of our study. Why are the scriptures so great? There's lots of ancient writings that are survived to this time. Why don't we include them? Why don't we be open-minded about this and include all of those writings and have a requirement that to be able to be a citizen, you have to master 3 major religious. You have to have deep study and prove that you've read 3 major religious groups' work. So you'll have a broader, more appreciative understanding of all the influences that society has created to get you to that point, so that you can understand the scriptures all in a way and be a better citizen. That's not the formula that God, the sovereign creator and ruler of the universe, pervades. That's not what he suggested to us in his body. Why? What? Okay, well, I've talked about God's power. I've talked about his timelessness, the different kind of being it is. But what else gives God the right to tell us what to do? He is our creator. Again, I wasn't there to see it firsthand. I'm pretty old, but not that old. No one was around to see it firsthand. Even when Moses writes in the beginning, he wasn't there to witness it. The Holy Spirit's revealing it to us, but as it's described to us, God created everything. Everything in the universe. Excuse me. And for me, that includes the physical laws. You say, well, if there's mass, there had to be gravity. If there's mass, gravity has to work. If there was light, it couldn't travel any faster than the speed of light. Those are just the physical laws. And I said, I believe that God put all those laws in place. That was part of the creative process. As the authority, he in fact invented physics as part of the creative process. He is authoritative, if for none other than the pedantic, is that he made it all. It all belongs to him. And he says that in the Psalms that the cattle on 1,000 hills belongs to me. He doesn't mean that the 1,001 is free game and open to whoever can take it. That's a sweeping says statement of ownership. It all belongs to me. In terms of if you're considering who gets to say what happens to it. And that's something we as humans kind of represent. What's yours. What you can do with what you want with yours. And we think that that's kind of a pretty good rule as human beings, but we need to apply that to God too. God is in fact in an authoritative position to be able to do with as he pleases with what he wants. And that's what the scriptures paint for us. Chris, you get the last comment, Will. That's implicit. Yes, as a creator, and you can do with as you want. It does mean destroying it all, undoing it all at a time of your choosing. And that's also included in the authoritative position that God occupies in the universe, whether we all agree on that or not. Okay, that's the second thing that we have to understand, is that authority doesn't have to be by concession. Authority doesn't exist. Well, I would like to, I've got the power here and the rules, but y'all don't believe I can, so I don't guess I can. That's not the situation we're looking at here at all. We're talking about authority, the ability to make rules as you wish. Fortunately, he's good and wise and eternal and got many other things going for him aside from just his power, but his power allows him to be in a position of supreme authority. We'll continue next week.